Hi everyone! Today's video will discuss some of my tips for drafting and revising your research paper. So, first and foremost, you want to make sure that your claim is foolproof and is the best possible claim you could offer. We've talked about how the claim is really the foundation of your essay, and without a good debatable claim, your essay really has no foundation. So you want to make sure that you've written a foolproof claim that states your opinion and offers your audience an idea of how you will argue your position. So I have an example here from a textbook, and it reads, "Despite the expense, colleges should make every effort to create green campuses, because by doing so they will improve their own educational environment, ensure their own institution survival." Hi everyone! Today's video will discuss some of my tips for drafting and revising your research paper. So first and foremost, you want to make sure that you perfect your claim. We've discussed in class how your claim is really the foundation of your essay, and without a well-written and debatable claim, you really have no argument, and your paper will not stand on its own. Just like a house without a foundation will crumble. So you want to make sure that you have written a foolproof claim, that states your opinion and offers the reader an idea of how you'll argue your position. So I have a sample here from a textbook, and it reads, "Despite the expense, colleges should make every effort to create green campuses, because by doing so they will improve their own educational environment, ensure their own institutions' survival, and help solve the global climate crisis." So towards the beginning of the semester, we talked about how every claim needs to fulfill certain criteria. One of that criteria is that your opinion is clear. And we see here in this sample claim that there's a clear opinion that colleges should make every effort to create green campuses. Now the information that follows is what we might call a blueprint or a plan that offers to the audience a roadmap as to the different subtopics that will be included in the paper to prove this claim. So we know that this paper will focus on how creating green campuses will improve the educational environment, ensure the institution's survival, and help solve the global climate crisis. Next, you need to make sure that your intro paragraph contains enough background information so that your reader is aware and has a good sense of what the rest of the paper will discuss. So you want to provide the rhetorical context for your audience, right? Remember when we discussed how the rhetorical context includes a brief discussion of why this issue is important, who it affects, why your audience should care. That way you entice your reader to keep reading because you're talking about a social problem that they need to care about, and you're going to offer some kind of solution or suggestion as to how to help that problem. So that leads to my next slide, which is to grab your reader's attention. The first few sentences really need to be compelling. Imagine you're sitting in a doctor's office and you're flipping through a magazine. Think about what's going to make you stop on the specific page and actually read the article. Likely it would be either the title or maybe just the first sentence or two, something that catches your eye. Or likewise, if you're scrolling through Instagram or looking through Twitter, what's going to make you stop and read? So think about how you're phrasing your first sentence or two. Think about your title. You really want to make your topic appear really interesting so that the reader stops and gives you the time that you're asking of them to invest in reading your paper. So there are different ways to organize your information. We've spoken about inductive arguments and deductive arguments. You'll want to choose one and structure your essay accordingly, or it's possible to use a combination of both structures. So as you recall, in inductive reasoning, inductive structure, the author starts with specific cases or specific examples and then proceeds to a general conclusion. Whereas in deductive structure, it's the opposite, correct? So you would present general information and then through your paragraphs narrow down to present a very specific recommendation towards the end. You also want to establish your credibility, and this is really important. You want to demonstrate to your audience that you are a credible source and that you're going to present your information in a way that is fair and non-biased. Of course, we all have a bias, and that's something that we can't really escape as humans, but you definitely want to put as much effort as possible into making sure that you're presenting your information in a way that's as least biased as possible. And one of the ways that you can do that is to not distort facts or to attempt to skew statistics in your favor in order to support your arguments. You want to write honestly. Another way to establish your credibility is to make sure you're using credible sources. So we've talked about making sure that your sources are vetted and having a fair amount of scholarly sources in addition to credible popular sources, such as newspaper articles or film documentaries. Social media sites such as Twitter and Facebook can be acceptable for anecdotal material, but I will note that you should use these sparingly. So if you find a tweet that is just so amazing and and really enhances the validity of your claim, then by all means use it. Just of course make sure that you have vetted that the source of the tweet and that you include the proper MLA citations for that source. Using subheadings to divide your paper is a great way to make your essay more readable. And I always like to recommend it because not only does it help your reader to stay on track, but adding those subheadings forces you to think about how you're organizing your information. So I have a sample MLA formatted paper here. This is an annotated paper. I got this from the OWL at Purdue, and I know there's a lot of writing. It's actually a little bit busy, but I just wanted to show you what a heading might look like. So we see here at the top of the paper, there's the title, all of the formatting is correct. But if we scroll down a bit, we see that there's a heading here, historical context. And the heading is almost like a transition sentence, but instead of signaling what the next paragraph will be about, the heading signals what the next section of paragraphs will be about. And again, that helps the reader to stay on track, especially since this is a longer paper. So of course you want to make sure that you cite your sources. This is really important because we always need to attribute any ideas that are not our own. And not only do quotes and paraphrases need sources or citations, but any information that is summarized after reading an outside source needs to be cited too. So if you read something in a journal and you thought it was really great material and you wanted to include it, you didn't quote it, you didn't necessarily paraphrase it, but you're summarizing the information, that needs to be cited as well. And in-text citations are always necessary. So at the end of that sentence, make sure you're including a parentheses that indicates to your audience where that information came from so that we could easily go to your works cited page, locate that source, and look it up to read further if that's desirable. So how much of your paper is original? We don't want your essay to be just a string of quotes and paraphrases put together. That's not really what research is, right? So one way to see how much of your paper is original is to save a new copy of your draft in a separate document, remove all the quotes and paraphrases from the essay, and then see what's left. You should still have a substantially written argument. So if you take out all of that outside material and what's left looks like a skeleton of a paper, then you know that you really need to work on more analysis, more synthesis, and just more original thinking. Adding the quotes and paraphrases back in should only further strengthen your argument. Proofreading, of course, is really important, and I always suggest to students that you save at least a full day to proofread your paper before it's due. It is a time-consuming process, but it's definitely worth it in the end because small errors can cost you big. For example, if you forget to include an in-text citation, that's an example of plagiarism, correct? And that can result in a 0 grade because you're not giving the proper attribution. So take the time to proofread. You want to proofread your paper multiple times. Other things that you can focus on is getting rid of the clutter. So you've heard me talk about wordiness, bloated phrases, and it's not just that it's harder to get through wordy writing. It's not only cumbersome, but a really wordy paper is a less powerful argument. So a good argument is concise and is written with a confidence that you might not necessarily see if there's just a bunch of like bloated phrases in the paper. You also want to use active voice constructions whenever possible, as opposed to passive voice construction. You want to use strong descriptive verbs and adjectives. So your job is to keep your reader engaged throughout those 10 pages. And that's not necessarily easy to do. But one way to do that is to be really intentional with your word choice and to think about keeping that reader's attention with passionate writing and really descriptive verbs and adjectives so that your reader doesn't get bored and decides to put the paper down. Now, as far as grammar, I know that I have some students who use Grammarly and it works pretty well. It can be a good source, but just like with spell check, not always catching spelling mistakes, you should never rely fully on technology for your proofreading. So yeah, use technology as a tool, but you really want to rely on your own brain and your own intellect to make sure that your paper has a nice flow, has good spelling, proper mechanics, proper formatting, etc. Okay, so for people's names, I am still seeing a few papers in which you're referring to an author by the first name only, and that's definitely a writing faux pas. You don't want to just use an author's first name. That's considered to be disrespectful. So the first time you mention the author, use the first and the last name. But on subsequent mentions, you can just use the last name only, but never just the first name. So here's a technical tip. The period always goes after the end of the citation's parentheses, unless you're using long quote format. So I noticed that some of you are still putting the period after the end of the last word, and that's not where it goes. It goes on the outside of the end parentheses, so please remember that. Long quote format applies to any quote that is 4 lines or longer. You may have seen me comment on that on some of your previous essays. In addition to making sure that those quotes are formatted properly, you want to limit the amount of these that you include. It's always preferable to paraphrase. The only time you should really use a direct quote if it's worded in such a way that it's so amazing that you can't possibly say it better yourself. So you want to limit the amount of quotes that you use. You definitely want to limit the amount of long quotes that you use because it's a little disruptive to the reader to have to switch back from your writing style to the author's writing style and then back to your writing style. So we as the audience, we want to read your words, we want to see your writing style. It's easier for us to get through the essay if that writing style is consistent. So just limit the amount of those long quotes. We've talked about transition sentences. Make sure you end your paragraphs with a transition sentence that offers your audience a preview of what the next paragraph will be. That helps to ensure a cohesion and just a smooth flow to link all of your paragraphs together. Run-on sentences is something that you may have seen me comment on in some of your essays. You can use this link here to help you to make sure that you're not writing run-on sentences. Back to proofreading, I have some additional tips. You want to read your paper out loud and slowly and listen for smooth flow and correct grammar. Sometimes we don't realize that our sentence is missing a word, or maybe it's constructed awkwardly, and when we're kind of reading it in our head, we don't notice it. But if you take the time to read your paper out loud, then you might hear some of those strange constructions or missing words or extra words. You also want to double check the spelling of authors' names. Make sure you are consistently spelling names correctly. Please make sure that your works cited entries are alphabetized. That's proper for MLA formatting. You always have access to our ATPA coach or to a writing center tutor. You can book an appointment online and have an appointment with a writing center tutor to help you with your proofreading. Expand your vocabulary. This is important. This is something that I feel like we'll all be working on for the rest of our lives. And one way to do that is to download the Merriam-Webster app, which is fun because they have a word of the day, they have word games, and it's just a good way to have access to a dictionary and to a thesaurus, and to be able to look up words quickly. Another way to expand your vocabulary is to read. Really, that's the best way, is to read as much as you can, read voraciously, and be observant. So what does that mean, to read voraciously? It means to read as if you can never get enough, right? And be observant. When you're reading for pleasure or for other classes, look at the way those sentences are constructed. Look at the kinds of words that they're using. Look at, be mindful of what you like about a sentence or what you don't like about a sentence. And by being more intentional with that, you can then transfer some of those things that you've learned to your own writing, and that will help you to become a better writer. So that's all. This was a long video, so thank you for hanging in there if you've made it this far. If you have any questions, as always, please email me, send me a text, or schedule an appointment with me, and thank you so much.